When George Washington took office as the first President of the United States in April 1789, he inherited a nation still in its infancy, burdened with debt, divided in politics, and uncertain about its future. The Constitution had just been ratified, but no one yet knew how it would truly work in practice. Washington would have to define the presidency itself, while facing countless challenges: massive war debts, unsettled territories, conflicts with Native Americans, tensions with Britain and France, and the rise of bitter political factions. In this video, we'll follow George Washington through his presidency, exploring how he shaped the foundations of the American system, where he succeeded, and where his successes would later have to pick up the pieces. Laying the foundations of government. In 1789, the U.S. Constitution had left many aspects of government undefined. Nearly every action Washington took could set a precedent for generations to come. His decision to deliver an inauguration speech, for example, became a permanent presidential tradition. So did his preference for the modest title, Mr. President, rejecting grander terms like Your Excellency. To staff his new government, Washington formed the first presidential cabinet, appointing John Adams as vice president, Henry Knox as Secretary of War, Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State, and Alexander Hamilton as Secretary of the Treasury. The role of vice president was still unclear, leaving Adams famously frustrated, calling it the most insignificant office that ever the invention of man contrived. Washington also took steps to shape the third branch of government, the judiciary. With the Judiciary Act of 1789, he established the Supreme Court and appointed John Jay as its first Chief Justice. He also created lower district courts to uphold federal law. This system remains the backbone of America's judiciary today. The Bill of Rights. Perhaps the most pressing demand from the American people was the protection of their individual rights. The original Constitution lacked explicit guarantees of personal freedoms, a major point of criticism during ratification. Several states, including Massachusetts, had only agreed to approve the Constitution on the condition that such protections be added later. Washington agreed, urging Congress in his inaugural address to ensure that citizens' rights be impregnably fortified through amendments. While some argued that the Constitution already protected these rights by limiting government power, voices like James Madison and Thomas Jefferson pushed hard for clearer safeguards. In 1789, Madison introduced a series of amendments to Congress, 10 of which became the Bill of Rights. Ratified in December 1791, these amendments guaranteed freedom of speech, religion, and the press, the right to bear arms, and fair legal protections, forming the foundation of American liberty. Conflict in the Northwest. While Washington oversaw the admission of Vermont 1791, Kentucky 1792, and Tennessee 1796 as new states, his early years were marred by military disasters in the Northwest Territories. Native tribes, supported quietly by the British, fiercely resisted American settlers. Washington, a military man himself, sought to assert federal control. His first campaign, led by General Josiah Harmer in 1790, ended in disaster at the Battle of Kekionga, where hundreds of Americans were killed. Determined to revenge the loss, Washington ordered General Arthur St. Clair to launch another offensive. But in 1791, St. Clair's army suffered an even greater catastrophe at the Battle of the Wabash, where over 600 Americans died, the worst defeat ever inflicted on the U.S. Army by native forces. The debacle prompted the first congressional investigation of the executive branch. Though Secretary of War Henry Knox was blamed for poor supply management, no one was punished. Instead, Washington and Congress used the crisis to expand and professionalize the army, increasing pay and passing militia acts that required all able-bodied men to serve if called upon. Hamilton's financial revolution. In contrast to military setbacks, Washington's economic reforms, driven by Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, were remarkably successful. Hamilton, brilliant and ambitious, sought to stabilize the nation's finances by consolidating state and federal debts into one national debt, strengthening America's credit. To fund repayments and government operations, Hamilton introduced new tariffs, taxes, and government bonds, and established the U.S. Mint to standardize the national currency. His plans, however, angered many Southern leaders who distrusted centralized power. Hamilton reached a famous compromise. The South would support his reforms in exchange for moving the national capital southward, to what would become Washington, D.C. Hamilton's crowning achievement came in 1791 with the creation of the Bank of the United States, designed to manage debt, issue loans, and stabilize the economy. Though critics like Jefferson decried it as unconstitutional, Washington approved the plan, agreeing it was a necessary and proper tool for governance. The rise of political parties. The clash between Hamilton and Jefferson soon gave birth to America's first political parties. Hamilton's Federalists favored a strong central government and a commercial economy, while Jefferson's Democratic Republicans promoted states' rights and agrarian independence. Washington leaned toward Federalist policies but despised the growing partisanship. Almost every issue, from the economy to foreign affairs, sparked fierce battles between the two sides. By 1793, Jefferson had resigned as Secretary of State, though he remained deeply involved in organizing opposition against Federalist policies. The Whiskey Rebellion, one of Hamilton's most controversial taxes, the 1791 whiskey tax, provoked widespread anger among frontier farmers who relied on distilling spirits for income. When tax collectors arrived in Pennsylvania in 1794, violence erupted, sparking the Whiskey Rebellion. Determined not to repeat the chaos of Shays' Rebellion, Washington invoked the new militia laws, personally leading an army of 13,000 men to suppress the uprising. The rebels dispersed before any major battle occurred. This firm response demonstrated the federal government's new strength and authority. Around the same time, the U.S. achieved victory in the Battle of Fallen Timbers, 1794, under General Anthony Wayne, ending major native resistance in the Northwest and leading to the Treaty of Greenville, 1795. The young republic had proven it could defend itself both at home and on the frontier. Foreign affairs and neutrality. Washington's foreign policy was marked by prudence and restraint. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, Jefferson urged American support for France, recalling their alliance during the American Revolution. Washington, however, doubted the stability of the revolutionary government and feared entanglement in European wars. When war broke out between France and Britain in 1792, Washington issued the Proclamation of Neutrality, 1793, keeping the U.S. out of the conflict. His decision angered France's envoy, Edmund Charles Jennet, who tried to rally Americans to join France anyway. Washington demanded his recall, then offered him asylum when France threatened to execute him. Diplomatically, Washington achieved key successes. The Jay Treaty, 1794, normalized trade with Britain and secured British withdrawal from Western forts. The Pinckney Treaty, 1795, resolved disputes with Spain, granting Americans navigation rights on the Mississippi River. The Farewell and Legacy. By 1796, Washington had guided the United States through its formative years, establishing political, financial, and military stability. Many urged him to serve for life, but Washington, true to his principles, voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms, setting a precedent that would define the presidency for generations. He left behind a young but resilient republic, one capable of facing its challenges, though still divided by deep political rivalries that would only intensify in the years ahead.